so exciting that we're actually having a webinar to talk about getting volleyball back up and running again. And so we are really pleased to be here. Hopefully after tonight we can answer any questions that anybody has and clarify a little bit of the guidance. And firstly, I just want to say thank you very much for being so patient. It is a bit of a torturous journey, I have to say, to get to where we get to with this guidance each time. It feels like it's changing on a daily basis. It's not quite that, but it sometimes feels like that. And just the reason this is so late as such is that the way the government are doing this is each time we move to a new step, the earliest they will put out their guidance is 1 week before the next step. So they talked about having this 5-week period in between each step, and so to allow them to have that 5-week period, it's never going to be more than a week before the next step comes in that they issue their guidance. Then we have a bit of a process to go through to look at that guidance, interpret it, see what it means, and then be able to put it out there for everybody to understand what that means for volleyball. So please, bear with us on that. Just in terms of, in terms of what we want to just put across to everyone, it is a collective responsibility. Really keen to stress that point. We all want to work together on this. We have to follow the rules. It is really important, because any one person who is breaching those rules, there is the potential of, it's not just Volleyball England that would be sanctioned as a result of this, because that sanction is potentially we could have our return to play plans withdrawn. So if we do breach the rules and government decide to take action, then it could stop anybody anywhere in the country playing volleyball in any way. So it is absolutely everyone's responsibility to work together and to sort of reinforce those rules as much as we can. And I think it's also just important as part of this this process to stress how we want to work along the government guidance. This message of hands, face, space, and now fresh air is a really important message that we want to put across to everyone. I think we're very lucky in the volleyball world that we have options of volleyball that are outdoors. The outdoor grass volleyball option and the beach volleyball options, as well as outdoor sitting options. I know we all want to get back in the leisure centres and start playing, but we have got options of playing outdoors. And so to really try and stick with that government messaging and try and reduce that risk. The risk is less outdoors than it is indoors. We all know that. So we want to really try and push those options of playing outside. And we'll talk a little bit later on around whether there's possible ways of tapping into some funding to get things like outdoor nets, so you can get out on the parks and start playing some games there if you haven't already. Just in terms of what's happening in Volleyball England, all of our staff are back from furlough now. We are quite short-staffed. We have held on to a few vacancies throughout this lockdown period. We're going out to advert in the next sort of couple of weeks, where we'll be recruiting more staff. So please do bear with us. Whilst we've not got staff furloughed, we are a bit short on resources at the moment, but we are back in the office. Well, not back in the office. We are back at work, so ready to take any queries and listen to you, any questions, etc. I've got a session on Thursday with Sport England around what's happening for the next stage, for the sort of step 2 of all of this. So any questions that you ask tonight that we can't answer, we have got that opportunity of putting those in front of Sport England on Thursday. So please do ask away. This is absolutely your opportunity to ask questions and to clarify. And if we can't, hopefully we can answer them tonight. If we can't answer them tonight, then we'll either look into it or we'll certainly ask Sport England those questions a bit later in the week. So it is about your session. It is trying to make sure we work collectively to try and tackle these challenges. And I thought the last thing I would say, just before I hand on to Rob to talk about the session, is you'll have hopefully have seen in the media today the UK Sport announcement that British Volleyball have received £375,000 towards sitting national squads and 260,000 towards beach and indoor national squads. So it's just really, really excited about how that money is going to be spent on improving the sport of volleyball. So I think it's always nice to have something great to talk about, and that is really, really good news that's come out today. So I didn't want to sort of move off this slot without just celebrating the success of getting hold of that money. Okay, over to you, Rob.
Yeah, just a quick couple of things to mention at the start of the webinar in terms of how the conversation will go. It is a conversation, so we're really keen for people to be asking questions. I'm sure there is a lot of intricacies in people's situations, and this is a good time to ask those questions and hopefully get those answers. So at the moment, everybody's got their mics muted, which is great. But if you do have a question at any point, just raise your hand on the Teams platform. If not, if you're not comfortable asking a question or unsure, then you can type it into the chat box. Stuart will be fielding the questions and asking as we go. So before we move on to the next slide, we'll try and get all the questions answered as best as possible. And then finally, we are going to record. In fact, we are recording this webinar. So just for your information, because we want to share it with the wider community, the people that aren't able to make it here today. Okay, over to James.
Yes, so thank you. So the first thing that we need to define is what is organised volleyball, because that's crucial. If we're doing organised volleyball, then the limitations on the number of people who can take place don't apply. If we're doing informal, bunch of mates on the grass, then the rule of 6 or 2 households apply. So how do we define organised formal volleyball? So we define it by 2 things. So first of all, who's doing it, and secondly, in terms of the compliance with our guidance. So if you are a constituted volleyball club that is affiliated to Volleyball England, that means that you meet the organisation requirement, or if you're a qualified level 2 coach or above that's affiliated to Volleyball England, then you meet the criteria. Or if you're an organisation or charity that complete the event registration process with Volleyball England, then that means that you're good to go from that side. There are a set of guidance which are published on our website with the link that's shown there, and we'll talk about most of those on the webinar later. If you do both of those things, then you meet the definition of formal organised volleyball. So next bit, so what environments are we covering? So right now we're talking about beach, grass or outdoor volleyball, plus sitting volleyball outdoors. There'll be a separate session talking about indoor sitting volleyball and volleyball for disabled participants at a later date. As I say, the guidance is there. What's the definition of recreational outdoor volleyball? That's really informal sport and activity that's not covered by any of the exemptions. And it's just really about, you know, the rule of 6 or 2 households. You can go out and play, but it is strictly limited to that number of participants as laid out in the government's guidance. Okay. Right, so this is sort of the meat of the session. This is where we're going to talk about what rules we have to follow. Now, a lot of these are exactly the same as before, but there are a few changes, so it's really important that we just remind ourselves of all of the rules. So obviously, all of the rules that were there before about prior to volleyball. So if you've got any symptoms, you shouldn't go to your session. If you've got a temperature, a cough, a loss of sense of smell or taste, do not go to a session. When you travel to that session, make sure you either walk or cycle if at all possible. If you do have to drive, then if possible, don't share a car. So all of those things that apply. In terms of the organisers and the venue, make sure that the volleyballs are clean between each session, and make sure that all of your participants opt in, i.e. they've read all the risk assessments, they're happy with the risk assessments, and they opt in to both following the COVID officer's protocol and also that they opt into accepting any residual risk. In terms of the event or activity requirements, probably the biggest thing is still the requirement for the COVID officer. The COVID officer is there to make sure that all of the COVID requirements and protocols are met. Here's the first big change. The first big change now is that there are 16 people per court. So that means that you can pretty much play normal volleyball, 6v6, couple of subs, that's all good to go. Beyond that, you can even go to having up to 32 players mixing. So whether that be 8 across 4 courts or 16 across 2 courts, they can mix and play. So that means that if you've got, say, I don't know, a beach tournament, then you'd be good to play that tournament. You must though follow all of the protocols. There's still also the requirement to do the 21 days track and trace. So you need to keep a register of all of the people who are participating and how to contact them in the event that anything, there's any outbreak. During training activity, and I stress training, everything should be designed to avoid any face-to-face activity greater than 3 seconds. So you as the coach are in charge of that training session, so you can absolutely design each of your drills to make sure there is no face-to-face greater than 3 seconds. There should be no shouting because that increases the risk of transmission, and there needs to be a break every 20 minutes at least for sanitization, both hands and the ball. Now, when you move out of the training, whether it be match play in training or in competitive match play, then again, we want to do all of the things that we had before to reduce the risk of transmission. So, you know, you don't congratulations with the big hand slap, high fives, keep all of those out there. The first team to 15 points will have a 60-second timeout for sanitization. You clean the balls between sets, make sure you keep officials to a minimum, and the officials should be using electronic whistles. If you're recording things on a score pad, then you should bring your own pen to do that. And most importantly, the referee has the power to expel players if they breach any of the COVID rules and they see that as a risk. In terms of what happens after the volleyball activity, you should follow the government and venuing guidance. So, for instance, if the venue doesn't allow you to shower, then you need to go home to shower. And the same goes for all of the travel advice. You know, if you shared a car to get there, please use the same, share the same car to go back. Don't do a different one. In terms of, is there anything different for children? Yes, there are. So there's differences in the number of people allowed, but also things like the safeguarding personnel are exempt from the limitations on numbers. However, parents should safely drop off the children, but they should not stay to spectate, even outdoors. There is no outdoor spectators allowed. And then the last thing to mention is you do need to update your risk assessment. The risk assessment that you had 6 months ago, I'm sure will be a great base, but things have changed, and therefore it's really important to update that risk assessment to make sure that it is current and that you understand the new circumstances. And then if anybody asks, you can demonstrate that it's a new risk assessment with the new risks. Okay, so just a couple of diagrams to try and see if I can bring a bit more clarity to this, how it works in terms of the courts. So if you have 2 courts which are separated from each other, then you can have up to 16 on each court, and that blue double-sided arrow is to show that you can have mixing. So imagine that you had 4 teams and you wanted a little 4-team tournament on 2 courts. No problem, you can do that, and you can mix the players across the court. Obviously, assuming that your own local risk assessment allows that to occur. Not only that, but if you have 4 courts, say, then you can also have 16 players on each of those. So that would be a total of 64 players. However, what you'd have to do is, if you wanted mixing, you can only mix between courts 1 and 2 and courts 3 and 4. You could have no mixing between courts 1 and 3 as an example. Okay, is that clear? Is there any questions on that piece before I move on?
No, there's no questions there, James. It's just a point about, I guess, as soon as you're outside of that gameplay or training activity, that the rule of 6 kicks back in, doesn't it? So yeah, after an event, after sort of a session, just to make sure that is adhered to. There was one question actually since come in. Give me 1 second. James Oliver saying, so if you have a 3-court venue, how would it work?
So if you had a 3-court venue, it kind of depends. So let's play a couple of scenarios. If you've got 3 courts and you've got let's say 10 players per court, just to come inside the 32, then you can have mixing across that number. 32 is the absolute maximum for mixing. However, if you've got 3 courts with 16 on them, that's 48 players. You cannot have mixing on that court 3. So you could have mixing between court 1 and 2, but you'd have to treat court 3 as an entirely separate field of play and a different way of operating.
Nice explain. Thank you, James. There's one more question that's coming up. It's a hands up from Sarah Robinson. Sarah, I don't know if you can unmute yourself at the top of the screen and yeah, feel free to ask away.
Right, it's not Sarah Robinson.
It's not Sarah.
It's a father. I just can't quite understand, if the rules say it's 32 per session, how can you suddenly go to 64, even though you've got 4 courts? Surely. Yeah,
that's probably just translation. So it's actually 16 per field of play, 32 allowed to mix. And so if that's how you need to look at it, because what you're doing is you're looking at the risk of transmission between a group. So that's why you've got small groups. So with no social, with should we say unorganized sport, you can have very small groups. Remember, the way that this is all structured is that volleyball does not have close contact. Therefore, the risk of transmission whilst playing volleyball in a structured fashion is very low. Hence why organised sport does not have the same limitations as just general meeting. Consequently, if you look at what we've done, we've looked at it and said, what do we see as the maximum permissible risk for groups mixing? It's 32/16 per court, and hence why if you've got multiple courts which remain separate and distinct, then you can have greater numbers. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Can I ask a question about the car sharing? What's the government guidelines on car sharing at the minute? I haven't seen that.
So the government guidelines on car sharing is it basically says you should avoid it if possible.
Okay.
And if you do it, then if you're making a journey, then let's say you decided to take 8 people in 2 cars. If you've got 4 in 1 car, A, B, C, D, then when you come home, you should also have A, B, C, D in the same car, because again, that's close contact, increased risk of transmission between that group, and therefore it's not recommended. They also, and it's practical now, is they also recommend things like having windows open to reduce the potential of having COVID circulating in the car.
And there's a discussion around possible masks as well on that bit of the guidance. It's not as to whether you wear masks in the car. That's more of an individual sort of risk assessment, but it's certainly one of the things that government would recommend.
Correct. Okay, any more questions on that before I move on?
Not at that point, James. I think we've answered them all then. Thank you.
Okay, so another change to the guidance from last time. The other key individuals has changed. So coaches, volunteers who are doing organisation, other types of instructors, match officials are now not included in that number. However, they must remain socially distanced from players wherever possible. And for us, that's kind of relatively straightforward. So that's a big change. Another change is that spectators are not permitted at all. So, again, how do you define a spectator? Somewhat of a difficult conversation, but certainly what they're trying to get is there should not be crowds round and watching. You need to ask parents to go home and not stay and spectate, etc., etc. Okay, if there's no questions on that, I'll move on to risk assessment. As I said earlier, it's really important to update your risk assessment before you do your return to play. And just a couple of examples. So if you think about when we were playing before, the Kent variant wasn't the predominant variant in the country. It is today. And therefore the risk of transmission is significantly greater. But offsetting that, I saw today over half of the population is now vaccinated, and a number more have also kind of got acquired immunity. Therefore, both the likelihood and severity of people catching COVID has now significantly been reduced. So that's obviously a couple of things, but it really is down to you to do your own risk assessment and think about anything else that's changed. Sorry, I think there's a question came in about spectators.
Yeah, it was a late one that came in just on the last slide from Prakash. He was saying, does that apply for training and competitions?
Yes, yes, there are no spectators for training or competition. You know, they really are pushing on that. The risk is that as soon as you get spectators, they tend to gather, don't maintain social distancing, very difficult to control, and therefore is something that's currently banned.
I think it's part of step 3 of the process at the moment, where they might start coming in, and that's around sort of mid-May time. But yeah, that would be the earliest, I believe.
Yeah, and then I think
sorry, James, I was just going to make the point, and I think it is worth stating that it is the responsibility of that COVID officer within your club to try and manage that, and we absolutely appreciate how difficult that can be. And you know, we've all seen the scenarios where you perhaps have a parent who's at a fair distance away but is still spectating. You know, that's something we need to collectively try and manage, and very, very difficult conversations, but to try and keep everybody playing the sport, we've got to do the best we possibly can and say no spectators, which is the government's rules. Thanks.
Yeah.
There was one more question there, James, that had popped in. Richard Guest had asked, is it acceptable from a GDPR perspective to keep a register of those who have been vaccinated?
Yeah, very, very good question. So the simple answer about GDPR is if you have consent of an individual to keep that piece of data, then you're able to do that. I, however, would not recommend that you keep that information just because the controls that you have to put in place and the risk that you run as a club by keeping that medical information is quite high. Again, you know, I would have been running my outdoor session this evening, and I would have, you know, just because of what I've seen on our club's social media and the conversations I've had with various players, I have a good understanding of who's been vaccinated and who's had COVID. So I probably would use that, but I would do it very informally. I wouldn't make a point of it, and I wouldn't keep a record of it from a GDPR perspective, because they're just too much risk for the club.
Thank you, James. I think that's the last of the questions for now.
Okay. So next slide. So here's a few questions that typically get asked at this point. So I'll try and answer these beforehand before we go on to ask if there's any more. So I said earlier that coaches are not included in the limits of the number. So one of the questions that always gets asked now is, can coaches feed balls into the bubbles? So the answer is yes. However, what I would say is two things. So one is that if you think about what's happening when you have that occurring, if a coach is feeding a ball in, they are an extra person who are mixing, because you've got the fomite risk of transmission from contact with the ball. Now, that's not particularly high, but it is there and it is increasing the risk. So although it's allowed, I would look carefully and think about the particular circumstances you've got and ask yourself whether it's something you need to do, and make sure you note it on your risk assessment that you've done it or not. And at the same time, I'd also say that probably best practice today is that you know, even kids need to learn how to feed balls, and it's a good skill for them to have. And again, it just takes that risk out and an unnecessary risk. So I would be encouraging people not to do it, but it is allowed. Another thing that quite often comes up is what are BUCS doing? We've asked BUCS that question, and we haven't had a formal response yet. BUCS should be following the same set of guidance. The guidance issued by the government is that each organised sport should follow the requirements of the national governing body, and therefore we're expecting them to follow the same guidance that we've issued. I think we've already answered question 3. So question 4, are there any exemptions to the restrictions? Yes, there's a whole bunch of exemptions to the restrictions. I'm not going to go through all of them now, but we've talked about a couple of them. So there is an exemption for disabled sport. There's an exemption for playing of sport as part of academic curriculum activity and wraparound care. So there's an elite athletes exemption as well. But again, if anybody's got any specific questions about that, happy to ask it. And then the final question is, why can't a level 1 coach run a session? And has this changed the definition of organised sport? No, it's not. So our definition of a coach who is able to run a session independently is that they must be a level 2 qualified coach, and therefore that guidance still remains the same. Okay, I think I saw a couple of questions pop up.
I think they were just people. Oh no, sorry, there was a question. I did miss that. Sophia was asking. She might have missed this from an earlier slide. Is the maximum of 32 per players on court also include referees, coaches, and volunteers? Yes. So does the 32 include referees, coaches, and volunteers? The
answer is no. Those people are counted as separately, but they must maintain social distancing from all of the other participants.
And what was there, a hand up as well, I believe? Yes, Dave, would you like to unmute yourself and ask away? You should have the ability to do that at the top of your screen. There we go.
Yeah. It's possibly a very individual issue, but I can't remember how long ago it was I got my level 2 coaching coordinates, and I certainly haven't got ready access to the records of it. Does that matter?
Dave, it doesn't. You're covered by the club of Reading Aces, so you're good to go. Okay. You don't need both. You only need one. It was only if you decided that you had a couple of other households that you wanted to go and run a session with, which was nothing to do with Reading Aces, that you wouldn't be covered and you'd need your level 2.
Understood. But if that was not the case, then I would need to be level. I would need to have access to a level 2 coaching certificate. Is that?
Well, it actually goes beyond that. What the key thing is that as the national governing body, to actually sanction people to play, we need to know that they actually understand what the rules are and how to operate them. And so we need to know that we've communicated with it. So if you were a level 2 coach from 20 years ago and hadn't been involved with volleyball since and didn't know anything about the volleyball guidelines, you couldn't go out and do it because you didn't know what rules you had to be following. So that's the second part of the thing. Not only do you have to be a currently accredited coach, but you also need to know what the guidelines are. And the only way that Volleyball England know that both those have been covered is if we've been able to contact you through this route. Okay, any other questions?
Also, one question just come in there, James. Sorry, I'm getting a bit of feedback there. So can't quite figure out what that is. There's a question in there from Neil. Says, so to recap, can you confirm that to run a club session, the club must be affiliated and have a level 2 coach present? That's incorrect, right, James?
Yeah, that's incorrect. You need one or the other, not both.
I hope that answers your question there, Neil. No more hands up, no more questions in the chat for the meanwhile. So yeah, I think we're happy to get to the next slide.
I think that one's Rob's, isn't it?
That one's for me. So we just wanted to clarify that the sort of the timescales moving forward. As I mentioned earlier, it is a bit of a challenge that the earliest that government will release their additional guidance for each level is 7 days before that guidance comes into effect. So, you know, we're hoping that we will pick that guidance up. It could be 7 days, it could be 3-4 days. So we're planning for our return to volleyball working group to meet on the dates as listed ahead of or around the time that that guidance should be issued. A little bit hit and miss because it might not be available, but we've sort of gone on the side of caution and said let's go for the Wednesday rather than the Monday. We then are hoping to be able to get information out to members within a couple of days of those decisions being made as to how we interpret that guidance for volleyball. The government is very clear that it is an NGB-led process, so they give us the guidance, we then sort of make that volleyball specific and issue that. And then we're going to run a couple more of these webinars just to update people on the various stages as we go through this. So there'll be another one on the 12th of April and another one on the 17th of May. Obviously assuming that the government plans continue on the pace that they're expecting them to. If things get delayed and the dates that they'd originally said get delayed, then we might have to delay these. That's why the bit at the end takes effect from the 12th of April, 17th of May. And obviously, as we know, the new rules came into force yesterday for outside and for step 1A. So we just wanted to give you that in advance. If you want to put a sort of date in your diary, we'll advertise it on the website, the details, etc., of how to register. But we just want to make sure we give you plenty of warning of what's happening as we receive the guidance. I hope that's useful.
Awesome. And it's just a quick note from me then on the Sport England Return to Play Small Grant Programme. So if you've been following our social media channels or if you've been on the website, you've probably seen us mention this a few times. And we just want to take this opportunity just to remind you all again, particularly if you've not heard about it, or maybe as a reminder that it's a fantastic pot of money there. You might have seen that Wessex have received around £1,000 to cover additional court hire costs and cleaning equipment. Womborne got a similar amount of money, and that was for signage and again cleaning equipment. And then more recently, we put something on our social media channels about Coventry and Warwick Riga, and I think they received about £1,600, and that was extra equipment so they could do volleyball sessions for smaller groups, an online booking system, and cleaning equipment. And there's a lot of flexibility in that fund, and it's really there just to help clubs respond to those immediate challenges of return to play. So yeah, if you haven't checked it out, please head to our website. I'll just drop the link in the chat in a moment. And Sport England have recently extended that deadline to the 30th of June. So there's still a good 3 months to go to apply. So yeah, please check that out if you haven't already.
So just a quick summary of the changes. So as I said, the first thing is that you need to meet the minimum standards and compliance. So that's either a registered club, a level 2 or above coach, or a registered charity or event. And then all of the requirements as per the website. 16 people per court with up to 32 people mixing. But clearly you can do more if you have more courts, but they must be separate and independent. Volunteers, coaches and instructors and match officials are all not counted in that 16 people. And it no longer needs to be played in a purpose-built facility. So for beach, we talked about it being a purpose-built or cage facility. That requirement is no longer there. Yep. So I've just seen a couple of questions come in. So 32 does not include refs, coaches and volunteers, but they will be expected to not play and also to be socially distanced. Absolutely. Yeah, that's really important, right? So it's not you can have some volunteers standing around who then pop in and play a game. No, they have to be completely outside of, mustn't play at all during that entire session.
We did have a hands up. It wasn't Sarah. I didn't quite catch your name. Apologies. But the user's under the name Sarah Robinson.
Yeah, it's Mum now. Sorry. Yeah, we need to have evidence of our insurance. That used to be available online. Is that still downloadable in principle?
So my belief it is. You log on
Yes.
to the portal and you can download your certificate.
Yeah, that's available through the website, and yeah, you can download as just as James said, and we still have this exactly the same cover that we've had previously.
Thank you.
Awesome. And then yeah, there was one other question in the chat there. So David Goodchild is asking, when can coaches go back indoors, coach one-to-one or households, please? I think you're trying to say when. They're three separate questions all in one, David. I didn't know if you wanted to, did that make sense to you there, James? Did you follow that?
Well, I'll answer it, Dave, and if I don't answer your question, then ask again. So when can we go back indoors? It depends, and we're waiting to hear officially when we can go back indoors. But generally, you can't be indoors now unless you meet one of the exemptions. So, for instance, if you are at a university and you're teaching a sports degree, then you can be doing that as part of that qualification. Same if you're doing, I don't know, GCSE PE, you can deliver volleyball as part of that with the pupils in that school, with the appropriate exemptions. So that I think answers your question on indoors. On coaching one-to-one, you can do coaching one-to-one now. That's been allowed for a while because that is meeting up with one other person for exercise. So that's also permitted. And similarly, if you're talking about, if you're a house of volleyballers and you want to go and play volleyball as that house, yeah, you're good to do that as well, because that is also permitted under the relaxation from the 29th. In fact, you can actually, if you've got two households of volleyballers, then you can use that exemption and play as two households of volleyballers outdoors.
And I think just to add to that, David, the indoors organised sport is due to come back at the earliest, the 17th of May. So that's where we were saying we'll do a future webinar as and when we get that confirmed. But government guidance is at the moment is no earlier than the 17th of May that indoor activity will come back. But I will sort of temper that with, yes, you can go back inside, but if the weather's nice, and you've got a setup going outside, then seriously think about whether that's the right thing to do. We are certainly pushing and encouraging according to the government guidelines, which is hands, face, space and fresh air. So, perhaps consider using the return to play grants to buy some outdoor nets and think about whether you can do some training on grass for a little while longer to try and reduce that level of risk for as long as possible.
There was just one thing to add there. So with the return of the indoor game, the 17th of May was the return of the adult game. It looks like on the roadmap that the 17th of April could be for juniors, but again, it's all dependent on if we meet the key tests. So that might come at a later point.
Yeah, sorry, that's correct. Yeah, children and adults. Yeah.
David, I can see you've also got your hand up there. Did that answer all your questions, or was there anything you'd like to add?
Hi guys, thanks for the responses. No, it's a little bit up in the air. Clearly, we've been outdoors today, and it's been beautiful, as you can imagine, following the correct protocols. But for me, I've got a lot of international athletes and postgraduate athletes who want to play professionally and want to be indoors, working specific technically, just one-on-one with me. And it's just trying to get them back in and following the correct protocols. And what's the date? It said April the 12th that people can come back indoor one-to-one originally, and then I've just read different dates, so I just wanted to try and get some clarification.
So I was going to say, I don't think we can give you that clarification right now. We'll come back to you afterwards
No problem.
to answer that specific question.
No problem whatsoever. I appreciate that, and I'll appreciate the feedback later. Thank you, guys.
And just to confirm, there are a few follow-up questions from this. Tim and Deb were both asking about the return of junior play from the 12th of April, and that's right, yeah. So the 12th of April, which is step 2, or no earlier than 12th of April, sorry, that's when sort of organised indoor and sitting volleyball activity for juniors is set to return, but must stress that is the earliest point. So it might not happen then, we don't know for sure. And then it's the 17th of May, that's indoor, but that's for the adult game. So I hope that answers your questions there. And Phil, I think someone's just picked up your question there that you asked about is informal volleyball. So you're asking about recreational volleyball. Is that 6v6 or is it 3v3?
And 3v3 is the correct answer. It is absolutely only 3v3. There is definitely no 6v6 if you are unorganized. And I love the other comment in there. Of course, that can also be 1 versus 5 or 2 versus 4, depending on how outrageous you want to be.
Oh, good you are. Graham, I know you've got your hand up there, waiting very patiently. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask away?
Yeah, it's Graham Sawyer here from Weymouth Beach. I'm just wanted to go back to your question, statements about spectators. How do you define a spectator when you're on a public beach? Because because obviously you get where we are in Weymouth Beach, we're right in the centre of the town. There's always people going to be walking past. When do they become a spectator?
Yeah, and obviously there is no definition for that. I think basically what people walking past and looking over their shoulder as they walk past, they wouldn't be classed as a spectator. If they sit down and start, sit down facing the court and start watching it, then they're going to be seen as a spectator. And really, it's going to be down to you guys to look at that and say, okay, so how are we going to manage that? What's our definition, and how are we going to, how's our COVID officer going to gently ask them to move along?
Great job. Yeah. And is there any note in the future guidance when those spectator restrictions might be reduced?
I don't recall when they say it's going to be done. I think June is probably, where they say the majority of restrictions are gone. That's the conversation as I understand at the moment. I'd have to check.
Yeah. So what they've said is no earlier than the 17th of May they can start bringing back some spectators, but according to very strict capacity guidelines. And yeah, it's not really until the end of June that they can open that up. So it would be very much a controlled spectator event where you're potentially looking at 50% of what the spectator capacity might be at an individual event. So you get into a whole ream of confirming what your spectator capacity might be to ensure social distancing and all those sorts of things. Otherwise, it then becomes the no earlier than the 21st of June.
Okay, that's brilliant. Yeah, and we'll we've got our Weymouth Classic in the middle of July. So hopefully, if everything goes to plan, we might be all right. Yeah.
Hopefully,
okay.
yes.
Okay. All right. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. No one else has got their hands up at this point. There was one other question in the chat. I just asked James if you got any more information, but James, you're asking about, is this the same for park volleyball on grass? But I couldn't quite remember which point that I didn't pick up when you mentioned that in the conversation, so I can't remember what it's relating to. So if you want to either pop some more detail in the chat or raise your hand, and then we can jump to that. But other than that, we've answered the questions. You pick the one up there, James.
Yes. So yes, it's exactly the same. Beach and public parks are the same rules, same way of operating.
And just as I spoke there, Richard Guest is just asking about sort of season planning for next year. So Richard has asked, is the plan still to run the 2021-22 indoor season? And if so, when do you expect to start taking club and player registrations? Probably an impossible one to answer at this moment, but any views?
Yeah, so the competitions working group have met a couple of times already this year, and please, if you're interested, go to the website and go to About Us and the comps working group, and you can see the minutes there. Yes, we are planning to run essentially a normal season, although there will be a number of decisions that we'll leave to much later before we confirm them. We've made the decision that we're going to do a sort of a gradual run up to some of the key questions. So we'd love to go out to all of the clubs today and say, are you going to enter next season? Yes or no? Please register with us and kind of go for it. But we're very cognizant that indoors not even allowed yet. Lots of people haven't been able to even talk to their venues and get understanding of when they're going to open. So it's actually too early for us to actually ask that question. However, we are planning over the course of the next months to start surveying the clubs, asking them if they can see any barriers, etc., so that we can kind of get to that, and then hopefully we will be able to start the season as per normal.
And then there's one last question that's just popped in then from Nicholas, and I see Graham actually got his hand up as well. Nicholas said, pretty sure we're fine, but supposing a club forgot to register for this year, I believe that's right, yeah, 2021, is it too late now to do so, to register, so they can take organised park beach sessions, so they can organise organised sessions there? So yeah, is it too late to register your club for this year, so they can organise organised sessions?
No, of course not. We'd love to have you to register.
Awesome. And then Graham, would you like to ask away then?
Yeah, sorry.
No worries, that's what we're here for.
Question. We have permanent courts on the beach, okay? And so what we're planning to do, from what you said earlier, is to have notices on those courts saying that social distancing has to apply, rule of 6, etc., when it's not an organised event on the court, to have that there. Also, the courts will be barriered around, so the ball can't go across down the beach. From your point of view, is that as much as we can do to make sure those permanent courts are okay when we're not there? Because obviously they're up all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly difficult with those kind of permanently up courts to do it. I think the answer is that the way we've been looking at it is, if you start to see stuff on social media, somebody saying, look, let's go down and play on the courts, then we would ask you to educate those people that that's not okay, and then think about how you can, again, gently dissuade them for doing it. The problem being is that the government have basically made us responsible, Volleyball England responsible, and that means all of us responsible for making sure that these rules are followed. And if they're not followed, then potentially, as Sue said at the beginning, there could be sanctions on us for not making sure the rules are followed. Now, it's all about practicality and what you can do. We're certainly not expecting you to install a security guard 24/7 and make sure nobody breaches any of those rules. But we also don't want people saying that we knew of an event going on and we didn't take any intervention to prevent it going ahead. So it's a delicate balance, but certainly what you suggest is a good first step.
Okay, all right. Well, hopefully that will work. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Yep, and then I see another question.
Also, yes, one from James. So regarding unorganised volleyball, a few people have asked, what restrictions should they follow? Is it still rule of 6?
Yeah, so basically, if it is unorganised volleyball, then it is rule of 6 or 2 households, and that's what they have to follow because it's unorganised.
Sorry, I missed quite a few then. They just sort of buffered through. So Phil asked, when is club affiliation due again?
I can answer that one if that's helpful. So the affiliation window is between the 1st of August and the 31st of July. So it's available now, and if you've bought it for this season, then it will run through to the 31st of July.
And there was one here, Sue, that I think you might be able to help with. Nicholas was asking a question for a friend. If there is a known Volleyball England affiliated club who is not respecting the rules in organising tournaments, does Volleyball England have any sanctions in store for such breaches?
Well, we have had to, as part of our return to play plans, develop a sort of enforcement process, which would it ultimately include sanctions. And yeah, I mean, what we hope we never get to that point. Our first point is that we want to communicate with you, we want to work with people, we want to try and collectively try and manage this so that we don't get to a point where we have to impose any sort of sanctions onto clubs who are breaching the rules. It's not something that we, you know, as I say, we don't want to get there. But what we've got to remember is if we don't take action, and we're seen not to have taken any action, then we could lose that right to play at all. If DCMS, the government, revokes our return to play plans, then all volleyball activity across the country in all disciplines would probably have to stop. So it is that sort of collective approach to try and solve this. So I'd like to think that people who know about this will try and work with us, and you know, not go to anything that they know is breaching rules, or let us know about stuff where that's happening, and just try and let's work together to try and solve this. You know, ultimately our aim is not to stop activity taking place. This is all about enabling safe volleyball to take place. We absolutely want to get everybody back on court, and everybody playing as much as we possibly can. We also don't want people to get ill. You know, this is a horrible disease that is spread around the whole world, and we want to minimize the risks as much as we possibly can, and our collective response to this will minimize those risks and still enable people to keep playing. So let's work together on it.
Awesome, thanks for that, Nicholas. And yeah, just one final point, that hopefully you're all familiar with the web page by now, but if you have any questions, we have lots of information on volleyballengland.org/coronavirus. So that's where we have the safety plans. You can see the roadmap, so you can visualize at which stage and the changes are meant to come into effect. And there's things such as risk assessment templates, and there's some guidance on things like safeguarding as well. So yeah, volleyballengland.org/coronavirus is a good page to have bookmarked.
So I think we're just about at the end now. Rob, I think that's we've hopefully answered everybody's questions. If you hadn't a chance to ask the question tonight, or you want any more information, please do either email us at info@volleyballengland.com, or go to the website. Hopefully you'll find the answer to your questions there. And get in touch. You know, we can collectively tackle all of this and hopefully get through this period. It is going to be quite complicated over the coming weeks, as things changing on every sort of 4 to 5 weeks basis. But from my point of view, thank you everybody for turning up and hearing all about what's going on. Massive thanks to James, to Stuart and to Rob for organising this, and stay safe out there. And I look forward to getting out and seeing you all playing volleyball as soon as we can. I won't be coming to spectate just yet, but one day in the future soon, I look forward to it. So thank you very much, everyone.